So this is a video description of planting avocados. I don't know if you had avocado. I'm sure most of you probably do. Very nutritious fruit. This problem asks you to plant avocados, regardless whether you're planting in your front yard, backyard, or maybe you don't have yards, balconies, or in your kitchen in a potty planter, assuming this is the soil, right? Avocado seeds are pretty big. So when you plant them, you want to make sure, assuming you're planting multiple of them, you want to ensure that there's space between them, whatever the space is. Let's just assume you're starting with a long stretch of partially planted field. This is the above soil here, represented by vector. In C++, you can either use an integer array, primitive array, or vector. The issue with using a primitive array is you'll have to compute the length of it. For array doesn't have bounds in C++, so you have to pound include vector. We did this before in prior problems here. This is a vector or array with a whole bunch of ones and zeros. Those ones are already planted avocados out there. So that's your starting point, given this field, vector of integers, ones and zeros. There are no other numbers. This second argument as the number of additional avocado seeds that you want to plant. So your function can plant avocados returns either a true or false. True if additional seeds could be planted in the field. Premise here is very important to understand. They cannot be planted adjacent to each other, meaning you cannot have consecutive avocados like 0, 1, 1. This is a no, right? Because 1 and 1 are touching each other. So you want to make sure that at least there's a space, like another 0 in between at the minimum. So you could also have 1, 0, 0, 1, for example, because this 1, these two seeds do not touch each other. There are no consecutive avocado seeds sitting next to each other. Consecutive meaning they're one after the other, right? Or touching each other. You can also assume that the input field coming in, they do not have any avocados touching each other. There will be avocados, so there may not be any avocados at all. So you can have a field with nothing, but this field is pretty big. It's all wide open. It's all zeros. And then you are asked whether additional avocados could be planted. So let's look at the examples here. First example gave you a vector of 3 numbers. Can you plant this additional one in here? You can't, right? Because the only configuration, if you planted it, it will give you 1, 1, 1, which means this one right there is touching each other. So this is not a configuration given the input. This returns false. This other example says 1, 0, 0, 1. You can't, because this will result in either this or this. This means that this avocado and this avocado, they're touching adjacent avocados, which makes this configuration false. So this is a false. You can also have this configuration. If this is the case, you can have 1 here, 1 here. This represents true. And of course, you can have this wide open field with only 1 in it already. You can plant it here, you can plant it here, you can plant it here. Generally, you can have many different variations, but the result is asking you whether you can or not. This is true. You don't have to have avocados on the boundary. So it's perfectly okay to have a configuration looking like this. By the way, I'm using this bracket to represent that this series of elements inside the array is sitting inside the array or a vector. Okay, so this bracket represents array or vector notions in this course. Let's look at the starter code. This is something that you will want to start with. So cut and paste this thing. Please do not write them all by yourself. There's a pound include vector that is missing to ensure the compilability of your code. Your code is not going to compile because this one expects a return and there is no Boolean returns here. So you're going to have to add it yourself to compile this first. Just add your code here. API documentation per the syllabus, like I stated before. Constraint and assumptions are already assumed. You can assume that the field or input field is at least 1. So this input field cannot be empty. There's at least 1 element in it. It could be 0, it could be 1, all the way up to about 1,000. The second parameter, which is n, number of additional avocado seeds, could be anywhere from 0 through 999, all inclusive. N could be 0. If there's nothing to plan, the answer should be always true. So that's the edge condition that you can check for. Field is a vector or an array of ones and zeros. That's it. There will be no other numbers like 2, 3, 4. These are invalid or -1. It's going to be ones and zeros. Super important. In your input, the input is not going to have any avocados touching each other, right? So we talked about this. Important to keep your function signature exactly the same. Okay. So if you misspell it, like let's say they're avocado, you use singular, but this one is plural, your code is not going to compile. And this is going to cost you a resubmission, and which may be subject to late work penalties. A couple of hints. The very first one is because your function returns a Boolean, please just return true or false. Don't write ones and zeros. This happens to a lot of students asking whether I should return ones or zero, or do you really mean true as in double quote true? This is Boolean. The output example simply indicates that the Boolean true or false. As a best practice, don't use ones and zero because this is confusing. Even though your results are still the same as true or false, they're just not very descriptive. Vector size can be determined. So this is from your prior homework as well. If your vector is a v, you can use v dot size. This determines the capacity of your vector. You can use that to write your for loop. Please remember to go through your constraint assumption. These are assumed. You don't have to check again in your logic. And also some of the examples that illustrates how this works.